Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Atlantic's final conversation, exploring the future of democracy. I'm Candace Montgomery, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Atlantic Live. Today, you've heard from national leaders, advocates, and elected officials alongside the Atlantic's journalists as we've explored the fragility of democracy at home and globally, the rise of authoritarianism and extremism, and their related crises of disinformation and misinformation. For our final conversation, we're going to tackle border security and immigration reform, led by our staff writer, Caitlin Dickerson. Caitlin's phenomenal 18-month investigation into the Trump's administration's family separation policy was the cover story of our September 2022 issue. And now, please welcome Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas with Caitlin Dickerson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Congressman, for being here with me today. In your short time in Congress, you've engaged very deeply on immigration issues, and sometimes in surprising ways. So I'm excited to dig in to hear what you think we should be doing here in Texas and also nationally when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be a lot of fun.
So I want to start with something that you've said about immigration that stuck out to me right away. You've said that immigration and border security are two separate issues. It's kind of the opposite of what I'm used to hearing. The two are usually very muddled in our political debate. So can you talk about that? What do you mean by that?
I represent Texas's 23rd district. It's over 42% of the southern border, 823 miles. Takes me 10 hours to get from one end of my district to the other, larger than 30 states. And when I first started running, one of my mentors pulled me aside and he goes, here's the deal, I just got one piece of advice for you. Stay as far away from immigration reform as you possibly can get. It is a political loser. And, I represent a district that's half of the border, and the border crisis is as bad as it's ever been. And all I do is talk about the border and immigration. And while I say they're separate is because they are. And anyone who lives along the border understands that. Even some folks in Texas, Texas is a big state, and the further away you get from the border, the less you understand it, the less you see it every single day. And this is why I say they're two separate things. We should all be for preventing bad actors from entering our country. We should all be for preventing fentanyl that's killing our children. All these different, folks on the terrorist watch list. Everybody, I don't care where you at, I don't care what your political affiliation is, we should be against that. In the same breath, America is the most beautiful country on earth. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. This is part of our identity. We are that beacon of hope for the world. And what I've been pushing is we should all be for legal immigration. This is something I think both parties get wrong. If we focus on legal immigration, there's a lot of work to do in that space. You can have both a secure border and you can have an immigration system that I think that makes sense and help those that want to come and live the American dream.
I think that's a really interesting perspective, and you've immediately right off the bat identified something that we share in common. We've both ignored the advice to steer clear of immigration. It comes up a lot, right? Because it is this really thorny issue. And Republicans, your party in general, tend to move in lockstep in Congress when it comes to immigration. There are some exceptions to that. You're an exception to that. But it comes with consequences. So just recently, you were actually censured by the state GOP for refusing to sign on to a bill that constitutes what would be an immigration crackdown, a severe restriction on asylum, as well as for your support of gay marriage and of gun control. So, a two-part question for you.
Yeah.
Tell me about your identity as a Republican. Tell me about what that means to you, what being a Republican means to you is, and then also tell me, why are you challenging your colleagues despite these consequences? One more I actually want to mention that I left out is that a former high-ranking ICE official has announced he wants to challenge you in your seat from the right for your views on immigration. So very real consequences for this decision.
I wouldn't say high level, but we could disagree there. First, you got to know a little bit of kind of who I am, because whether it's these votes or other votes, I'm always going to be an independent thinker, and that starts. The topic changes, but who I am is never going to change. And, you know, at 5 years old, at 5 years old, I remember spending time in a battered women's shelter in San Antonio. I remember going to live with my grandparents in a small little town, Camp Wood, outside of Uvalde, and growing up kind of in the country. And then at 15 years old, I remember coming back to live with my mother, and nothing had changed. It was that same chaotic environment, and I've always believed in making my own luck. So at 15, I've lived on my own since I was 15 years old, working 2 and 3 jobs to get to high school. I'm a half credit away from graduating, and my grandfather, who is the most influential person in my life, passes away. So I drop out of high school. So, you know, I'm kind of lost for a little bit of time, and I praise God that he pulled me out of that and sent me on my journey. You know, I thought I was going to join the Army. I've always believed in service. My father was in the Army. My grandfather was in the Army. I've got a lot of cousins in the Army. I go to the Army recruiter, and he tells me, hey, we need you to get a GED. You did great on your ASVAB, but we need you to get a GED. And I go, hey, look, if I wanted to get a GED, I'd have done that 3 years ago. I've been fighting for this high school diploma. And I go home defeated. Well, my cousin was in the Navy. He calls that night. I don't believe in coincidences. He calls and he goes, hey, you ever thought about joining the Navy? And I go, why would I do that? I don't know how to swim. I don't like the water. I don't like sailors. Like, why would I do any of that? And he's like, stop it, knucklehead. He goes, you can do a lot more. The Navy does a lot more than just that. Just go to the recruiter. And I go to the Navy recruiter, and he goes, wow, you got great ASVAB scores. You're Hispanic. Like, he's just checking all these boxes, right? And in the recruiting world, you get points for certain things. So he's like, oh, man, hit the jackpot with this guy. And he goes, well, we can make you a cryptologist. And I'm like, what is that? He goes, I don't even know what that is. And he pulls this little card out, and like top secret clearance, working with National Security Agency, doing analysis and reporting. I go, that sounds pretty good, but this is what sold me. He goes, you could get your high school diploma while you're in the Navy. They had a program for that. And so I ship out. I learned to swim when they pushed me in the deep end of the pool at boot camp, and I get my high school diploma when I was stationed in Pensacola, Florida. So that is who I am. I'm this 5-year-old kid that is scrappy, that has had to fight for every single inch, that will always have to fight for every single inch. Then I represent a district, the 23rd District of Texas, which is a scrappy district that is at the heart of every possible chaotic scene you can imagine. I get elected, in 2020. 3 days after I get sworn in, January 6th happens. I remember being in the chambers. I don't even know my way around. And Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma, he's now a senator. I go, hey, Mark Wayne, hey, man, you could feel the energy in the Capitol was going bad. You could just sense it, like when it's going to rain. You know, you can smell, you're like, oh, it's going to rain today. I asked Mark Wayne, I was like, hey, if something goes down, where do we go? And he goes, look, everyone's going to go out that door. We're going to go down the speaker's lobby, and you're going to go straight ahead. I'm like, okay. And then as soon as something went down, what did I do? I ran to the door to block, to barricade it, to help out the Capitol Police. There was a handful of us that did that. Most people ran away from the door. So that's just who I am. I've fought in 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm always going to do what I feel is right. And I'll push back against anyone that does it, whether it's my own party, whether it's the other party. Sometimes I'll be right, sometimes I'll be wrong, but I think that's a big part of kind of, I'm not going to go along to get along, and these votes are, we can dive in more into it, but at the end of the day, I'm going to be this independent person.
What I wonder is there a limit to your willingness to push back? If, for example, polling were to show that this challenger we're discussing is doing well based on his perspective on immigration, for example, do you think that you might change course? Do you think that you might begin to toe the party line a little bit more?
Yeah, and the best thing about politics is they will vote you in and they'll vote you out, right? I mean, it's all about you and what are you delivering? What are you doing for your district? What are you doing besides rhetoric? There's so much rhetoric in politics. That's easy. I mean, the easiest play to run in politics is blame the other side for everything that's wrong. Blame Trump for everything that's wrong in the world. Blame Biden for everything that's wrong in the world. You do that, you get your base excited, everything's great. But guess what? You'll never solve big problems like immigration reform. You'll never solve big problems like border security. And that's all great. I live it. My people are at the front of this. I've got ranchers going, hey, Tony, this is terrible. I got damaged property, and I've got people coming through our pastures. It wouldn't be so bad if they would stick around and help me with my crops. So there's a lot at stake. So yes, is there a risk to this? 100%. There is absolutely a risk when you are, willing to push back. But is it the right thing to do? I think so. And here's the thing: no one's going to outwork me. No one's going to outwork me. I mean, we'll do it all, from the political side to raising the resources to get your message out, to the grassroots side of just having town halls, listening to regular people. Everybody and their mother has my cell phone, and they all let me know when the good times are and the bad times. So, I think I'm confident, we'll keep delivering for the district.
I need to get that cell phone number. I'm sure I'm going to need it for interviews moving forward. I don't have it yet. I want to talk next about drug cartels, another issue that I know you care about a lot. It's top of mind for a lot of Americans because of the 4 Americans who were kidnapped and 2 of them killed just last week in Matamoros, Mexico, an area I know well. I've taken several reporting trips there. You and I know those conditions are nothing new. It's not typical for Americans to be caught up in that kind of violence, but it is an everyday reality for residents of that community and other communities just across the border from Texas, closer to your neck of the woods. It's also the reality for migrants who've been marooned in these areas because of restrictions on asylum. So I know you have strong views about drug cartels. I know they're influenced by your time in the military. So tell us, what do you think we should be doing as a country to combat these dangerous drug cartels?
One of the things that I've tried to lead my party in is focusing on what the root. You hear this term root cause all the time, right? And the administration started down that route. They tried to kind of spend some energy on it, but you can't just do 1 or 2 things and then call it good, especially a topic like immigration. I mean, you have to spend so much time and energy. It's why so many people on both sides of the aisle have given up on it and just use it as a political football, if you will. Well, one of the things that I think that as you understand Mexico more is very complex. And while, you just saw 2 Americans were killed in broad daylight. I mean, this is insane. I mean, imagine that, 2 Americans killed in broad daylight, and nobody really blinks an eye. I mean, that's a problem. That's one. So something has to change. My very first bill in Congress, literally February of 2021, was the Security First Act. It does a couple things. One of the things that it does, it labels cartels as terrorist organizations. It adds technology to the border. It streamlines hiring for Border Patrol agents, and it helps sheriffs. Oftentimes, the local law enforcement are the ones doing the heavy lifting. So I would much rather see my party and honestly America focus on the bad actors instead of demonizing some of these migrants that are coming over. And I'll give you an example. Last Christmas, I spent 20 years in the military. I've spent a lot of Christmases gone, and we always think about our troops during Thanksgiving and some of the holidays. But I started thinking, what about the Border Patrol agents? They're pretty much on the front lines of this. So I want to spend Christmas Day on the border. And I did. I left San Antonio at 3 a.m. We went to Del Rio, Eagle Pass, Sanderson, Alpine, Marfa, everywhere. I had 5 different Border Patrol stations. And when we arrived at the Del Rio station, it was 7 a.m. in the morning, Christmas Day. I have this idea, hey, it's Christmas, and I've been to countless times, maybe hundreds of times. And I'm thinking, all right, it's Christmas, probably going to be a little slower than it normally is. It was 7 a.m., and there was already 40, 50 migrants there being processed, okay? And what I saw a Border Patrol agent. This is how I captured that moment. I saw a Border Patrol agent who's asking these different migrants in Spanish, hey, where are you from? Where are you going? Kind of the standard topics. And he just looked tired. I mean, he just looked worn out. You could tell he's just tired. His shift just started, by the way, and he's already exhausted. And that goes to show, last year we had 14 Customs and Border Patrol agents commit suicide. So that's when I think of that tired agent. I think of these agents and that's a historic number. In the same lens, I see a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a little boy who's 4 or 5 years old, and this little boy is holding her hand as tight as can be. And he's scared, they're scared, and all I can think of, what kind of hell have they gone through to get to this moment? And honestly, what kind of hell is ahead of them? Because just when they enter the United States, that doesn't mean like, oh, hey, we've made it. I mean, it is just beginning. So that's what I see. I see a broken system all the way around. And I'd much rather see that family that was fleeing for for whatever purpose be protected. And if it's economic purposes, they don't qualify for asylum. So quit pretending and quit pushing them down this road when they're ultimately not going to qualify. Right now, about 88% of folks that file for asylum do not qualify. So why not create something else? To me, it's an economic path. It's a work visas. It makes sense. And then build out from there. That's what I see. These are the kind of moments where if you parachute in and you do, a half a day, you can save whatever talkers you want on whatever side, but then you get on a plane and you leave. Those of us that live it every day, we understand border security and immigration are two separate things, and if we can solve both of them, we can save a lot of people's lives.
I also think that opening up legal pathways in the way that you're describing also plays a role in disempowering cartels, right? If you have a legal way of entering the United States, you don't have to pay a criminal organization to get you in, and you don't have to experience the kinds of things that you're likely to be put through trying to get into the United States today, being put inside a stash house,
Yes.
Experiencing violent attacks, being robbed, being asked to carry things across the border you don't want to carry across the border.
Yeah, imagine if they're paying Uncle Sam instead of the cartel. Imagine if they don't have to live in the shadows, they can actually come over and work. And imagine if you were an employer and you could actually hire them instead of having to pretend as if you don't hire illegal labor. Like, these are all things that can be fixed. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes political will, but these are all things that can solve multiple problems. And then you can say, hey, look, we've got this program that allows all these people to come and work. I'll also say, too, a lot of people coming over, they're not going, the people I've seen, I look in their eyes, I have conversations with them, they're not going, I can't wait to vote for Joe Biden. They're going, I can't wait to get a job. I can't wait to send money back home. I can't wait to, have a life for my family. And so if you can remove the politics in it, which is extremely difficult because it's lucrative for both parties to demonize one another, you can solve some things. And then you can go, wait, look, we got this path where everyone who wants to come over for economic purposes, those that are coming over illegally, and there are a bunch of folks that are coming over dressed in camo from head to toe. I mean, I imagine this. Imagine you have a house, right? And in your backyard, somebody jumps your fence that's dressed in camouflage from head to toe and walks through your backyard. I mean, what would you do? This is what's happening every day on the border. I mean, I visited Uvalde last week, and I had a very prominent person. I'm like, hey, give me the update. What's happening? He goes, a couple things. One, every day we have high-speed chases. Not every day. Every week we have high-speed chases coming through Uvalde. Every week our school goes into lockdown 3 or 4 times a week. Imagine you're one of those parents, and a lot of people don't realize, a lot of these families lost a child, but there were 2 or 3 other children that they still have. And so imagine you lost a child during this horrific school shooting, but you still have 2 other children. So you have to be strong for them. And you get a text message that says, hey, our school's going into lockdown. Why? Because of the border crisis, because this high-speed chase. That's what's happening. So he told me a story. He goes, hey, look, I had my granddaughter over for the weekend, and we're excited to have our granddaughter. She's from out of town. Everyone's excited. My wife is upstairs bathing her. We're getting ready for bed. I'm downstairs, and I hear my wife scream. So I immediately come running up there, and there was an illegal alien that was trying to break into the house. He goes, I grab my gun, I hold him at gunpoint, I call the sheriff, and I wait for someone to come up. This is a staunch Democrat, right, that believes in all these different things. But guess what? If you had someone intrude on your space, you're going to feel in danger and threatened. Everyone just wants it to go away. I think there's a way to stop blaming others, and let's dive into it if you can find enough people to kind of come alongside.
I want to dig into a couple of things that you just mentioned, slow us down a little bit. You talked about taking the politics out of the equation, and I think what you were alluding to there is this fear I've been hearing for years among members of Congress and their staffs who are leading on the Republican side the debate over immigration. And there's this great concern that the more people who are allowed into the United States with a pathway towards citizenship, the more Democrat voters there are in the country, that automatically everybody who crosses the border wants to vote for Democrats. I have not found that to be true in my reporting, and it sounds like you also were saying that's not what you believe to be true based on your own experience.
So I'm Mexican-American, and I represent a district that is predominantly Hispanic, and I'm a Republican. And I won by 17 points last cycle. I won a district, I won a county right on the border that had never gone Republican ever. So oftentimes when I talk to some of the people that are fleeing Venezuela and Cuba and some of these places that are very harsh on people, I mean, I look at them, they're small business owners that have left everything behind for a chance at a better opportunity at life. I look at them and go, you're a Republican. I mean, just the principles, kind of small government, freedoms, just these different things. So I think as a Republican, there's an opportunity for the Republican Party to thrive here, but you have to stop demonizing people. And on the other side, on the Democratic side, you got to stop kind of spending more time and energy on the asylum process when you know they're not going to gain asylum, right? So the sad part is many of these people are having to live in the shadows wherever they go, and they're going all over the country. They're going to, there's literally not, I mean, you go down the list, Illinois, Florida, Iowa, Alaska. I mean, they're going to all parts of the country, and they're having to live in the shadows. So I think if you can remove the politics on both sides, because one side likes to demonize the other side likes to demonize the other, you can solve a lot of problems. We have work shortages in every single industry. It's no longer just agriculture and construction. I mean, you ask any business owner, they go, I don't care the color of your skin. I don't care who you pray to. I don't care what's happening in your bedroom. Can you show up on Monday and pull a full week's work in? You're in, right? So I think we can solve a lot of these problems, but it takes, once again, the political courage to do that. I've been working, I'm really proud. I mean, I've hosted 16 congressional delegations at the border. And these things are brutal, right? I mean, you got members of Congress, there's 435 members of Congress, and everybody's different, right? And so we've hosted over 100 members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats at the border. Not enough Democrats, but I've hosted several. I'll do more bipartisan trips in the future. But this is, I think, how you get people out of Washington and you get them into some of these real issues and start having some progress.
I'm going to follow up on those delegations later. But first, I want to dig more into what you just said about the realities of the American economy, right? Because so much of our debate tends to center on immigration as if it's this one-way street. A lot of people who want to come to the United States, and not this reality that there are so many American business owners clamoring for work. And how do we shift that? As you said, it's not just construction sites and farms anymore. It's restaurant kitchens, it's food delivery apps, it's domestic work, it's lawn care, it's you name it across the country. It's not just that a lot of people want to move to the United States, but that there are a lot of American business owners really seeking this labor. And yet we don't hear that. We don't talk about that in the national political debate. Does that need to change?
I think absolutely. I think if we truly want to solve immigration, you have to be bold in how you communicate on it and have real discussions. And at the same time, like, we are a nation of laws, and our laws have to be followed. And so what the frustrations I see with people that live along the border is it's a lawless kind of environment. So people are going, wait a second here. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I follow, I pay my taxes. I follow the rules. And my kids are going into lockdown every single week. My property is getting destroyed. And there's this frustration, rightfully so. And what I also see is a lot of these people, they're first-generation Americans. They're second-generation Americans. Their lives are turned upside down. So I do think we need to be kind of have an open conversation on it and go, how do you, there's nothing more valuable to a country than its people, nothing. And so how do you tap into the world's kind of brain power and bring folks over that want to come and prosper and do those things, but do it in a manner that is constructive? Look, pathway to citizenship off the table. I mean, politically, there's no chance of that getting done. Amnesty off the table. Deportations off the table. And so, I mean, are you willing to kind of have this real conversation, or do we start on both ends like we have for decades, where people kind of dig in and then it goes nowhere? To me, I think you start with work visas and you build out from there. You stay away from the more contentious topics and you go, let's focus on work visas, and then let's see if we can get that done.
Okay, so you're interested in opening up legal pathways, but that do not come with a pathway to citizenship. You're saying let's not talk about that at all, or maybe let's wait on that and start with short-term visas?
Pathway to citizenship gets complicated extremely fast. You say pathway to citizenship and you've lost half the people already. You can't even finish the conversation. Now, if you don't say pathway to citizenship, you lose the other half of the people right off the bat. So what I'm trying to do is kind of re-identify how people think. It's like, look, there's a reason why immigration hasn't gone anywhere for 3 decades, because everybody is dug in on what it should be. And I'm trying to find the areas that I think we can agree on and then build out from there. And then, you know, depending on how that gets, like if you can't get to step 1, how are you going to get to step 5 or 6 or 7? Now, people know that, and there's a lot of people that don't want to get past step 1. It's a reason why they start at the end and they immediately go, see, you won't do pathway to citizenship. You just want to demonize these migrants. Oh, you see, you want to do pathway to citizenship. You just want to, you know, you want us to lose every election. I'm trying, it's very difficult in this political environment. I'm trying to cut through both of those narratives and go, what if there was a different way? What if there was a more sensible way that was less contentious, less focused on the politics, and more focused on the practicality of what's happening?
That does get very complicated, because if you want to get a short-term visa to the United States, you have to prove that you don't have an intent to ultimately try to live here permanently. Right now, the way that you prove that is by showing that you have lots of resources, you have money, and that you're going to go home to your nice house and your business one day. And so that's not something that these farm workers, that restaurant workers will be able to prove. It doesn't exist in our system as it is currently. But I also want to press you on the pathway to citizenship, because I know very well that a lot of the reservation over pathways to citizenship among your party have to do with that concern we talked about earlier, this idea that if new migrants are given a pathway to citizenship, even if it's 10 years down the road, that they're definitely going to become Democratic voters. And you don't think that's true?
I don't. I mean, I see it in their eyes that they're looking for an economic opportunity. I also see a lot of people that go, I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to go back to Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador or Haiti or wherever I'm from to visit my family for the weekend or for Christmas or somebody's birthday or funeral or
to
things
move
that.
home.
What's that?
Or to move home to the house
or to
that
move home.
I was able to build with money that I saved.
That's why I think pathway to citizenship. I mean, a lot of these people, they're not going, I can't wait to be a U.S. citizen. That's not, for many people, that's not the goal. So where one side is kind of dangling at this, if we only give them pathway to citizenship, this would solve everything. And the other side is saying, if we only prevent them from having pathway to citizenship, many of these people don't want that. I think what they want is the ability to work and create wealth and do those different things, and also go back to their home and feel, going back. And imagine if you get a lot of people that have immigrated legally to the United States. When you go back to your country, wherever that is, it's Israel or Korea or Mexico, wherever you immigrated from, that first visit home, it's like you're a king, right? You have made it, and you've come home, and you're just as proud as can be. And guess what? Everyone is proud of you too. So I think that's the part where people are missing, where many of these people, they're not, they will always be tied to their culture. And they want to be tied to their culture. The only reason they're severing it is because they lack opportunity.
I've often found that to be true in my own reporting, that one of the first things new migrants will say is that, I'd really rather not be here and would have preferred to make a different choice. And it's also the case that I hear over and over. I just returned from a month-long reporting trip in Mexico, I met so many people who'd migrated in the 80s and the 90s and said, look, I would have loved a temporary work visa. I would have loved to not have to walk for days in the desert. I would have loved not to lose my cousin or my brother or uncle who died in the desert. So that short-term visa is, we have versions of it, but they're very, very difficult to get. The numbers are small. So you're calling for opening those up pretty significantly, it sounds like.
I would much rather see us focus on reforming the issues. And you mentioned a little bit earlier, I mean, there's a lot of issues with the visa process. And it seems as if everyone focuses on all these other areas, whether it's asylum or strictly on border security, and they don't put any time into reforming the visa process. I will say, too, though, a lot of my energy and my effort starts with border security because the district I'm in, people do not feel safe in their homes. It's hard for me to focus and look at immigration reform if I'm always trying to find a way for the people that I represent to feel safe in their homes, because they don't right now.
So back to border security, I also want to talk about the demand for drugs in the United States. I mean, shouldn't we be talking more about that? Of course, we're aware of crises around addiction to drugs in the United States, but it's very rarely, I think, part of the conversation around combating drug cartels. And as we all know, demand drives supply. You know, the powerful demand for drugs in the United States actually does empower and creates a money-making opportunity for these cartels. Are we talking about the demand for drugs in the United States enough? Are we doing enough about it? What do you think we should be doing about it?
I mean, once again, I think a lot of people have given up on that aspect of it, and they don't want to talk about it. But it's real. I mean, it's absolutely real. What I see is in this border crisis, it consumes everything it touches. And let me give you an example. A lot of these non-government organizations, which are doing salt of the earth work, many of them are faith-based organizations that help with those with addiction, or they help folks that have had assaults, or those that are down on their luck. I mean, they just help people that are vulnerable. In many cases, in this border crisis, everybody is now, all these NGOs are now sucked up into the border crisis. So guess what? They're no longer helping veterans that are homeless. They're no longer helping people with mental illnesses. They're no longer helping those with drug addiction. It's like all hands on deck to keep your head above water with the border crisis. And it's no longer just in Texas. I mean, look what happened in New York, right? When just a handful of people, or a couple hundred, or whatever the numbers were, showed up, it immediately created this frenzy. Same thing's happening in Illinois, same thing is happening in Chicago, same thing's happening in Denver. Anywhere that there's a larger than normal influx of migrants, there's a response, and that response consumes all of your local resources. In San Antonio, we have a migrant center, and I got very upset that this migrant center was being ran by the firefighters. And they will never tell you, hey, Tony, I won't, or they'll never say publicly, I don't want to do this, right? Because their job is public service. But what was happening is they're no longer fighting fires. They're no longer responding to EMS calls. They're now operating this migrant center. So what ends up happening is your community is no longer getting those resources. So this is why it's dangerous as this thing grows, and I've seen it go from bad to worse. This is year 3 of this crisis. And once again, I'm less interested in how we got here. I'm less interested in blaming Biden or anyone else for all the problems. I'm more interested in going, how do we fix this? And it's not going to take one party. And honestly, it's not, the White House alone can't fix it. The White House has to work with Congress, and we have to find some solutions to it. It can get done, but it takes energy and effort.
How do we get that done? I mean, this is my hard question for you, Congressman, is that there's been a lot of criticism of the Biden administration for its handling of the border, and there was also a lot of criticism, to put it lightly, of the previous administration and its handling of the border. But what was often missed in that discussion is that it's Congress that has the power to overhaul our immigration laws, that hasn't done so in over 25 years. I know you're new to Congress, but what's going on over there? I mean, is it going to happen?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Well, one, the Trump administration essentially got crucified for separating families. And now guess what the Biden administration is doing? They're talking about separating families. So, I mean, you see this cycle, and every administration has had to deal with it, whether it was Obama, whether it was Bush, whether it was Clinton. Every administration, whether they wanted to or not, has had to deal with the border crisis. Let me give you an example where Congress can kind of cut to the chase and get some solutions. So Secretary Mayorkas kind of reaches out about a month ago to get together for breakfast. And he's a very popular guy in the Republican Party, right? So I'm going, yeah.
That's a joke.
It's a joke. Yeah, no one got it. But
the Republican Party, much of it wants to impeach him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you say if I wanted to get a Republican crowd fired up, all I got to do is say Secretary Mayorkas, right? So, and I go, here's the deal. Let's have breakfast. So we have breakfast at DHS. At his headquarters, and it was I'm not going to have what our conversation was, but it was a very frank and kind of a formal conversation. I mean, not formal, like warm. It was just, we're having breakfast. There wasn't any audience. There wasn't any cameras. We were just having a conversation on all the different things. And one of the things that I said was like, look, I am rooting for you. I want you to succeed. Why? Because you're the Secretary of Homeland Security. And if you are successful, America is successful. And guess what? I don't care what party is in power. We should all get back to that. And let me help you, right? Let's walk through it. We talked about a wide variety of different topics. One of the things that I asked him for was this. I go, look, about 6 months ago, there was a Border Patrol station in Cotulla, Texas. It's about 80 miles from the border that was shut down. And there were 96 Border Patrol agents that were sent to Laredo for processing. There's nothing more that Border Patrol agents hate than processing. They want to be out in the field. They want to be catching bad guys. They want to be catching fentanyl. They want to be doing things. They don't want to be processing migrants. And I go, walk them through it and go, will you consider reopening this Border Patrol station? You talk about wanting to secure the border. Well, guess what? You need to have agents in the field doing that. Guess what? 2 days later, he turned that Border Patrol station back on. I went and visited that Border Patrol station, 96 folks, and they were ecstatic just to be back out in the field. I say that, was there risk with me visiting with them? 100%. Was there risk with him visiting with me? 100%. But having these kind of conversations, you can cut through some of the different noise. Yes, do we need immigration reform? 100%. Yes. Do we need Congress to act? Yes. But the administration can do some things today without having a new law. A lot of things are already in place. Can we make it better? What I'm getting at is everybody has a role to play in this. The more we can work together on things, the more we can get tangible, real solutions for everybody.
How many people stopped taking your calls after you met with Secretary Mayorkas?
Nah, they still take them.
They'll get over it?
Yeah,
Okay.
they take them so that way they can yell at me. So it works out.
Yeah, exactly. So you were talking about deterrent policies, if we can categorize them. So the separation of children and families under the Trump administration as they were crossing the United States border, something I spent a very long time reporting on. Now we know, I know from sources in the Biden administration that they're considering yet again deterrent policies, not the exact same ones. I think what you're referring to is this idea to detain families for prolonged periods of time, a policy that, one, doesn't work, but two, we know often puts parents in the decision of having to choose whether to cross the border with their child, knowing they're going to end up in jail, or to send their child across the border alone. I think that's what you meant by, quote unquote, separating families. So, here we are again debating the same deterrent policies that have been used again and again by administrations, Republican and Democrat. It's always Groundhog Day on the immigration beat. What does that say about us, that we're just debating the same ideas that we know not only don't have a meaningful impact on border crossings, but that carry these very, very serious consequences?
I mean, that's where I think there's an opportunity to have a different way. I mean, we can't try the same things we've been trying over and over again and expect to get different results. We're not, right? We have to do something different. And if we don't, there's a lot of people that are losing their lives. One of the stories that I heard when I visited Uvalde was from a Border Patrol agent. And a lot of times these agents, they come across very horrific scenes. And he goes, Tony, I was in a field and I came across a baby that was covered in fire ants. I mean, I'm a father of 6. Imagine if that happens to you. I mean, a lot of these agents, they have families of their own. Even if they don't, I mean, anybody with an ounce of humanity, that stays with you. Thankfully, they were able to save the baby. When I visited the unaccompanied facility in Uvalde, there was about a dozen or so kids there, and when you talk to these kids, I mean, there was a 5-year-old little girl from Honduras that was traveling with a 13-year-old teenager from El Salvador. Like, things don't line up. Oftentimes, not in every case, oftentimes they will travel with their family, and then the last bit, the family kind of tries to evade and say, then they turn over their child to the cartels, and the cartel, the coyote will drop them on the other side, and then they'll go, I'll meet you in Chicago, 3 months from now. But imagine you're a 5-year-old little girl, and you have to go through that whole experience. We're not talking 1 or 2 children. Literally tens of thousands of unaccompanied children are out there in this situation during the Biden administration. Like I said, I'm less interested in blaming anyone. I'm going, this is a problem, and we have to make it stop. So we have to implement different policies, because what we're doing now isn't working.
It's also the case that these deterrent policies that make it more difficult to enter the United States legally, we know often push people to find ways to get in that are even more dangerous. So, for example, getting into the back of a tractor trailer without any food, without any water, without any air conditioning. And I know you have experience with that in your district. Just last year, one such tractor trailer was discovered with more than 40 people who died in the back of it. So talk about how instances like that, which are not new, which have been happening for decades, how does that impact your community?
Yeah, I mean, imagine 53 migrants found cooked to death in the back of a trailer in my district. And the part that really upset me was, I mean, if that doesn't get you to move off a dead center, nothing will. And this whole, I mean, back to kind of the Americans getting gunned down in broad daylight. I mean, it's as if people just blink an eye, bat an eye, and say, everything's okay. They just go to a political answer instead of having a real conversation and going, we have to do something different. And part of that incident, all that could have been prevented. All of that could have been prevented. This is what happens. This happened in Laredo, but it happens in anywhere along the checkpoint. Every day, there's a shift change between Border Patrol agents, right? And during this shift change, the trucks get backed up for hours, okay? There's a shift change, the trucks get backed up, and what do they do to catch up? They wave everybody through, right, to a point to kind of catch them up, and then they get back to doing their inspection. Well, guess what the cartels do? They literally line it up so that way their truck that is carrying illicit material, whether it's people, which is now more lucrative than anything else, or whether it's fentanyl or anything else, gets lined up and they get waved through like clockwork. Guess what? That all can be prevented if we had technology at the border that would scan every single truck. We have that technology now. It's just not enough. This is where I go back to, if the administration truly wanted to do anything, I get it. You won't build a wall. I get it. I'm not asking you to build a wall. I get it. You don't want to add more Border Patrol agents, right? You're kind of anti-law enforcement has been their sentiment. Okay, I don't even want to debate you on those issues. Why not have more technology? This is not an intrusive way of doing it. Why don't we do that? And you can save lives. So this is where I go, oh, they don't have an interest in it. So what do you have to do? You have to push them. You have to prod them. You have to bring people to the table. And then ultimately, I think you can get something done.
So in the same way you were talking about, let's have a conversation about visas where border security, those words aren't even uttered. You're asking for funding to shore up ports of entry where we know most illicit material cross the border, not through illegal crossings, but through our legal ports of entry because they're waved through or because there's too much traffic to check every car. You're asking for funding to support those ports of entry and keep immigration out of the conversation.
Yeah, when you talk about border security, there's a laundry list of things you can do. I'm asking you to just do some of them. I mean, we don't have to get through all of them, just do some of them. As a member of Congress, I also, because you alluded to this too, look, Congress has a role to play in this. This isn't just about pointing fingers at the administration. Congress has a role to play. There are 3 different types of members of Congress. You got Republicans, you got Democrats, and then you got appropriators. And I am blessed to sit on the Appropriations Committee. What does that mean? It means the power of the purse resides in the House. And so some of these initiatives on the technology side, I'm not waiting for the White House to respond. I'm not waiting for the House to push some immigration package. Every year, the Appropriations Committee passes bills. And so, you know, and also I've worked with members on the other side of the aisle, like my good friend Henry Cuellar, who's my neighbor in Texas' 28th district, also an appropriator, working together on getting some of these programs appropriated that saves lives. The other thing is I used one of my community projects last year when Uvalde happened. You know, the Uvalde school shooting happened. One of the things that came out of that was, imagine this, not all first responders were on the same network. Meaning, you know, the firefighters were on this radio and the police were on this radio and the county was on this radio. Everyone was on different networks. I mean, how can you respond to an emergency if you're all not getting the same information at the same time? And so one of the things that we did was I used one of my community projects and we allocated $5.5 million to get 9 counties on the same radio network. What I'm getting at is instead of just complaining about it and blaming, whoa, I can't do this. No, it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and go to work. Now, the more people you have paddling in the same direction, the more you can get accomplished. But we got to stop waiting. No one's going to come save you. We got to be the ones that drive this conversation.
I want to ask you about Asylum, which you alluded to earlier, and maybe well, more than alluded to. We've talked about it a little bit, but I want to dig into Asylum. You talked about ways that it's overused or it's become too broad, but I know that you're not interested in it going away, right? Because the censure you just faced was for your refusal to sign on to a bill that would have all but eliminated the existence of the asylum program. Why do you think asylum rights should be protected? How do you do that without triggering the free-for-all that many of your Republican colleagues in Congress talk about that they fear? And, you know, maybe you have some stories that come to mind. I'm not exactly sure where your views on asylum come from, but talk about why you don't want it to go away.
So in Congress, you have these bills that have amazing names that don't accomplish anything what that name says, right? And this bill, H.R. 29, is no different. The Border Safety and Security Act. You're like, that sounds pretty good. And it turns out all it does is ban asylum for everybody, right? So I'm going, wait a second. 1, that's not the American way. I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, that's not the Christian way. And 2, if that were a law, that doesn't help secure the border at all. So, great name. You know, in Texas, we're in Texas here. In Texas, we got a saying, all hat and no cattle, right? And basically means all show, no real substance. And that's what I think about H.R. 29. It's all hat and no cattle. Now, while the asylum process needs to be reformed, and I mentioned earlier, about 88% of people do not qualify for asylum, there is 12%, around 12% that do. So what does that mean? That means, what about those people? You're just going to deny them asylum claims? I'll give you a couple examples. Afghanistan. I spent 5 years in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is very personal to me. I'm an Iraq-Afghanistan veteran. And so when I saw the administration abandon Afghanistan, that hurt. And one of the things that was kind of frustrating was there was nobody home. The State Department wasn't home. So a lot of members of Congress, we were the ones that were helping getting families out of Afghanistan. So I had one family in particular that called, and he had been an interpreter and been helping, him and his family had been helping the United States for decades. And here we are, we're going to leave him in Afghanistan essentially to die, him and his family to die. And he is desperate, right? He is desperate. This is what asylum this is why our asylum laws are there, you know, for those that are persecuted politically or religiously, to save them. And my office, this is just one example, and there were a lot of offices that had similar examples. My office helped get this family from Afghanistan to San Antonio. through that process, and it was tough. I mean, what do? You get a call and you're like, hey, we need to help this family get out of Afghanistan or they're going to be killed by the end of the week. You're like, holy smokes, okay, yeah, where do I start? And so we get this family here. He's got 5 children, and guess what? We help Sami get a job at San Antonio Shoes. And the guy is working at a shoe factory making shoes. Once again, doing jobs that a lot of Americans weren't willing to do. But guess what? His family is safe. He is living the American dream. One of his children was diagnosed with cancer. So we found San Antonio Children's Hospital that was able to get them care and get his cancer in remittance. And I mean, these are the stories. And guess what? Him and his family will be more American than you and I. They will love this country forever, right? These are the kind of stories. That's one. But the other one is this, is about maybe a year and a half ago, there were these 4 little girls that were abandoned in a field in Quemado, Texas, just thrown there like garbage. One of them's in Pampers. I mean, just these small little girls. So if this bill, H.R. 29, was law, what do you do with those girls? Do you just throw them back over the river? Do you just throw them on the other side? No. Like, we have to, there's a sense of protecting the innocent. Kind of going back the way I started this conversation. Who is Tony Gonzalez? Tony Gonzalez is that 5-year-old that spent time in a battered women's shelter. And so we have to protect the innocent. How hard is that?
I want to talk about South Texas and what's happening there politically. So I was in South Texas on election night in 2020, and I mentioned to you earlier, I was just driving around from one Republican watch party to another and watching this shift happen in real time, where we saw parts of South Texas become more red than they had really been in modern history. And what do you think that has to do with what we're talking about today, with immigration? Does it actually signal that these border districts want the opposite of what you're talking about? Are they wanting a crackdown? Do you think that's where that comes from?
It's really 2 reasons, and you kind of asked this question a bunch. A lot of people want to figure out like what is happening. The way I interpret it, it's 2 things. One, the Democratic Party has left many of these people. It's taken a far left turn, and it's left many people, like my grandfather, who was a blue dog Democrat. He wouldn't identify as a Democrat in today's environment. So that's one. You really have one party that is given up, and it just doesn't match up. That's one. The other is people, especially in Hispanic communities, they are kind of cautious of folks that don't regularly communicate with them. Kind of like, why are you here? What do you want from me, or what are you trying to sell me? So the Republican Party, I think, has failed because, a lot of times they go, they're not going to vote, and if they vote, they're not going to vote for me, right? So maybe I'll do a Hispanic outreach, throw a little bit of money at it to say, I try to get it, and then that's it. My approach was very different. My approach was, I'm going to show up early, I'm going to show up often, and I'm going to be who I am. There's things you're going to agree with. There's things you're not going to agree with. But you're going to get the same thing whether I go on CNN or Newsmax or whatever. If I showed up in Marfa, Texas, which is very blue, or Eagle Pass, which was very blue, or if I show up in Hondo, which is very red, you're going to get the exact same thing every single time. Essentially not telling you what I think you want to hear, just telling you kind of what I want to do. I think that's important. And a prime example is you look at Eagle Pass. You look at Maverick County. When I announced my run a couple elections ago, the first thing I did, I announced my run in San Antonio, and the very first thing I do was go to Eagle Pass, Texas. And everyone's going, you're crazy, Tony. There's no Republicans there. You're doing it wrong. This is the way you're supposed to win Texas's 23rd district. And I go, I'm not talking to Republicans. I'm talking to people that live in the district. And I visited there 23 times during that election. And then this cycle, I flipped Maverick County. And so people on the border, it gets complicated because they want to feel safe. They don't feel safe. And everyone deserves to feel safe in their own homes. In the same breath, in many cases, they see people that are fleeing and they see their grandparents or their great-grandparents in their eyes. What I'm seeing a tipping point. and they're seeing less of the compassionate and more of the frustration. To go, wait a second here, I'm compassionate, but my kids are now going into lockdown 3 times a week. My property is now getting vandalized. Our lives have been changed. So you're seeing this resentment, if you will, and that's the part where the Biden administration is getting it wrong. I mean, or anyone that thinks that people coming over, that this is a positive thing, they're only hurting themselves politically, because you're losing all those communities along the border that were predominantly kind of Democrat votes. They're going, I'm done with that. It's less about the Republican Party and more about what the Democratic Party's doing.
I'm trying to keep track of all of the things you've said today that I don't tend to hear when I'm interviewing your Republican colleagues in Congress. Separating border security and immigration, opening up workplace visas, protecting the asylum system. I hope everyone appreciates how distinct that is. And so take us behind closed doors, if you will, and we'd prefer that you name names, but if you can't, that's okay. I just want to know, are you getting any traction behind closed doors when you talk about those little girls, for example, but also when you talk about these really, really difficult policy issues and places where Republicans have been unwilling to budge for decades now? Is anybody hearing you out?
I feel very confident about the progress that we're making. One, having hosted over 100 members of Congress at the border gives you an opportunity to spend real, genuine time with your colleagues, and they can trust you. You get to know each other, and so that's one that's been helpful. The other is I've spent a lot more time with the Senate, because the saying is in Congress, I'm a Republican, so the Democrats are my adversary, but the Senate is the true enemy, right? So you got to kind of work the Senate side as well, because that's more than half of the equation. So I've been working with Senate, and not just like Republican and Democrat senators, having very frank conversations. And then honestly, I've had discussions with the White House as well. So it's, you got to get it through the House, you got to get it through the Senate, and you got to get it through the White House. It's a reason why nothing's been done in decades. But there is an opportunity right now more than ever. There is an opportunity. People want a secure border. We're seeing it firsthand, and people also want something different. They want a different option there. It takes a lot of time and energy, but I mean we're pretty close to rolling out some things here. But once again, it's hard for me to talk about immigration reform when a lot of my time and effort is focused on border security.
I want to close us out with a question about those delegations that you've been hosting along the border, and I want to know what you would, if you could take all of us with you, if you could take anybody in the country with you, I want to know, what are you trying to show your colleagues from your district that the rest of us all need to know? And what's been most surprising to people? But what is it that your district fundamentally understands about the border that the rest of the country may not? Take us on one of those trips. What would you want us to take away from it?
If you look in my phone, you will see I have friends. I have crazy right-wing friends. I have crazy left-wing friends. I have crazy centrist friends. I just have always been able to build relationships across the board. So on these trips, I've taken Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I've taken, who is in the Freedom Caucus, and I've taken Darren Soto, who's a Democrat in the Progressive Caucus, and everything in between. So what I try to show them is an unfiltered, as best as I possibly can, an unfiltered view of what life is along the border. And I will get them in a room. We'll do roundtables with first responders. We'll do roundtables with small business owners, with ranchers, with local elected officials, and it'll be Democrats and Republicans. And nobody knows. I mean, we'll go afterwards. I'm like, hey, Darren, did you know that was a Republican you're talking to? He's like, no way. I'm like, yes. Or I'll pull him like, hey, did you know that, another delegation, that was a Democrat you were talking to? And it'll be a mix of, you name it. I mean, from gay mayors to the most conservative ranchers. And they're in the same room having a conversation. We talk about border security, but we also talk about immigration reform. We talk about the work visa situation, and it's unfiltered, it's untapped, there's no cameras, there's nobody grandstanding to get time. It's just them getting a direct feel, not me saying it, It's the people that live there. I think if we do more of that, it's very powerful. When you walk away going, you know, the local sheriff is saying this, and the small business owner is saying this, and, you know, the teacher is saying this. It takes time, energy, and a lot of effort, but I think that's what I would like more people to see, is that piece.
So it's not even about observing one particular phenomenon or another at the border. Maybe we all see that in terms of the footage and the photos that we see in the news. You're simply trying to put Republicans and Democrats in the room together without them realizing it and trying to show them what they might have in common.
Exactly. Be in somebody's shoes, even for a day. Be in somebody's shoes. And we didn't even get into this, but beyond the border and the security piece, there's an economic piece. Communities along the border, they're one community. El Paso and Juarez is one community. Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras is one community. It's not as if this is the American side, this is the Mexican side. You've got people that cross back and forth, and there is a cultural bond. I also try to do that as well. I've got a chef, Mayito, that makes amazing food. So when you take one of my trips, you're going to walk away going, how do I get more of that food from Mayito? This is what I'm trying people to experience. You know, take the politics out of it and come visit one day in our shoes what we deal with, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then you'll walk away, you'll go, we have to fix it.
That's creative, the food. It's a way to keep people coming back. Well,
That's right.
Thank you very much, Congressman, for your time today. Really appreciate the conversation. Thanks, everybody who was here with us.
Thanks, Dale.